boo. Hi. Hi, we're going to put your hearing aids in.
Is there anything better than this?
Oh, yeah?
To be able to hear when your world has been silent.
Hi, Sage.
It's the moment they call switch on.
Hi. Hi, Sage. Hi, Sage. You are so funny. Oh my goodness. You are precious.
It's great.
Yeah, amazing.
You have these really magical moments, switch on.
Yes.
It must make you very proud of the whole team when you have one of those moments.
Immensely proud. And it's I've been with Cochlear 20 years, and the emotional impact of seeing someone switched on, whether it's a child or whether it's someone in their 80s, doesn't change.
Hi, Cooper. Hi, Cooper.
Cochlear, an Australian invention, changing lives in China.
It is restoring a sense, which is enabling people to regain what they once had, if they're an older person or if it's a child, to be then open to the world of sound and communication and normal schooling and all of the things that go along with that. So it's a very powerful moment, but very powerful because it's so symbolic of what the future means for whoever that person is.
Okay, I just want to see how loud you can hear right now, okay?
And in a series about the future, post-COVID, there is nothing more hopeful than this. Dig Howard has been with Cochlear over 20 years. And for all that time, the company has been steadily building its presence in China. The first surgical implants were in the mid-1990s.
There was an adult in 1995 in China and the first child in 1996. That person then depends on that implant for the rest of their life. So that forces a long-term view and long-term thinking on the company. The vast majority of people with hearing loss are older people. So in China at the moment, so we do about 90% of the implants are children, 10% adults. In Australia, it's 25% children and 75% adults. So as China ages, as wealth grows, as the healthcare system develops, all of those things are happening. Adults will start to get implants in increasing numbers in China, and there's a huge market. We think that there are over 5 million people in China with a hearing loss that would benefit from a cochlear implant. And at the moment, about 80,000 people in China have a cochlear implant.
Was it important that you have a manufacturing facility in China rather than export from here?
Yeah, I think it was an important step in our development. So we've been in China since 1995. We've progressively built up our commercial team in China, and we thought the logical next step was to build a manufacturing plant in China. And really for a couple of reasons. One is that we could see into the future where we would need more global manufacturing capacity, so we had to build a factory somewhere. The second one is when we look at potential in China, we thought that there was real value in having a factory in China that could supply China but also export. What we've seen is that companies that are manufacturing locally have typically been more successful than those that just import. Now, we'll continue to import into China, but we will also support that with local manufacturing as well.
So there's some potential rewards for investing actually in China itself and setting up manufacturing itself there.
Yeah, we think so. I mean, we're certainly only in the early stages, so our factory has been built. We're in the commissioning stage. You know, when we build a factory like that, we're thinking of the next 30 years, but we obviously did it on the belief that the long-term benefit is there, and it will certainly help enable so many more people in China to hear and support our presence in China and our ability to support all of the people in China who have one of our implants.
Cochlear is a shining example of an Australian business excelling in China. But the thought for many of establishing a presence there is daunting, and for good reason.
Because China is just hard. To set up an operation, hire staff and run a business in China in the domestic market, it's a significant challenge. There will be an entrepreneur there who has significantly more capital or access to capital than you do, who has a significantly deeper understanding of the local market, significantly stronger local relationships and government relationships and access to distribution. And in all likelihood, they will outcompete you.
It sounds overwhelming, but Yatsen Li is exactly the person who can help with the insights needed to navigate through the challenges. A first-generation Australian, born to Chinese parents, he speaks fluent English, Mandarin, Cantonese and German, runs a corporate advisory company, chairs an investment firm, serves on the board of Sydney University and is a member of the World Economic Forum's Global Agenda Council for China. So Jason, welcome to the show.
Very good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Now tell us a bit about your life story. So you grew up, born in Australia, Chinese heritage. What was it like growing up at Australia at that time?
Typical immigrant story in many ways. I was born in Sydney. When growing up, I always sort of wondered, well, am I really Aussie? What do I make of my Chinese heritage? How do I reconcile these things? We did things that are different, and I just wanted to fit in. So often for lunch at school, Mum would give me soy sauce, chicken wings and rice, whereas all I wanted was a Vegemite sandwich because I just wanted to be like the other kids. I refused to speak Chinese when I was in primary school and through most of high school. It was only when I got to university that I began to take an interest again. And luckily, my parents had the foresight. They kind of knew that this would happen. So before I went to kindy, my parents deliberately spoke no English to me. So even though I was born in Australia, when I went to kindy, my English was just okay. Because I had that foundation in Chinese, even though I refused to speak it between the ages of probably 6 to about, 14, 15, it stayed. I had the foundation and never went away.
It was a pretty good investment by your parents then, wasn't it?
Yeah, a lot of foresight. It's funny how parents know these things.
Jason is now a parent himself. And for more than a decade, he raised his 3 children in China, while he and his wife lived and worked there. That experience was invaluable, but the lessons he learned began much earlier, with the arrival of his Hong Kong-born mum and dad in Sydney in 1959. They had little money, but big hopes, and were following in the well-worn footsteps of generations of Chinese migrants to Australia.
It's fascinating. Currently, with all the geopolitical tension that's around, it's easy to forget that Australia's relationship with China goes back centuries. The first Chinese migrant to Australia was this guy called Mak Sai-ying, who came in 1818. If you think 1818 was when the first Chinese migrant arrived on a convict ship, then 100 years would pass, a century would pass before the Great War. And in the Great War, there were Chinese Australians who fought as Anzacs, people like Billy Singh, for instance, the decorated Anzac. And then another 100 years would pass before we reach the present day. There's a number of generations there, but that is, I guess, the arc of the history of Australia's relationship with China and everything that's happened since. So when we think about these geopolitical tensions that we're having with the PRC, with the People's Republic of China, that's just a very small part of the overall history of Australia's relationship with China, and it's a deep and long history. Overall in Australia, the proportion of Australians with Chinese heritage, it's about 5 to 6% of our population, about 1.3, 1.4 million people. That proportion is higher than pretty much any other country. It's higher, certainly higher than in the United States, higher than in the UK, it's higher than in Canada. And so because of the mix of our people, that's another reason why we can and should have a special relationship with China, provided that we can find a way to manage this really challenging political relationship that we're having at the moment.
You need look no further than Jenny Jia to find the mutual benefits of a migrant success story. This smart and savvy young entrepreneur runs her own business appropriately called Belong Here, a far cry from the bewildered student from regional China who touched down in Sydney after her very first plane trip a decade ago.
I decided to come overseas study, but mom chose somewhere I have to not have any support. I mean, no family, no friend. So like even I got an offer from Melbourne, but mom said, oh, you got cousins in Melbourne, so go to Sydney.
So your cousin's in Melbourne, so your mum said, you're not going there, you're going to Sydney because we want to go somewhere where you know no one.
Correctly.
Well, how did that go?
I don't know where that coming to her, but yes, that's how I come to Australia.
Because you actually came from a small town in China.
Yeah.
You didn't have a passport. You'd never been to Hong Kong.
No.
This was it. This was your town,
Yes.
Sydney.
Australia is my first time to fly over 14 hours too, so
So it was quite something, quite a culture shock.
definitely big, yeah.
There was method to her mum's madness. Not only did it teach Jenny resilience, it gave her the best possible understanding of the difficulties facing Chinese students studying in Australia. And from that, a business was born, a very successful business indeed.
Basically, because we understand our own community and we understand what the overseas study challenges are, and we see the gap there. So we have business in Sydney, Melbourne, Newcastle, and also in Auckland.
So you provide the accommodation for overseas students? And you provide what sort of services in addition to the property?
We type of like a nanny service rather than real estate agency, let's put it that way. So we do airport pickup and we hand them hand to hand to move in all what they need in the property, what the furniture or what the mattress they want on their own like bed. And so after that, we even help them understand, like we not really directly do that, but we help them understand how to look at the bank website, how to open bank card, how to apply for the ABN number or tax number in Australia. It's not hard. It's common sense for local people, but it's very big gap if you don't know.
So it's not just bricks and mortar, it's not just apartments, it's actually all the logistics, all the things you have to do to set up your life
Correct.
in Australia.
Yeah.
So you were going very well, you had 500 properties, everything going great guns,
18 months, yeah.
and then COVID.
Yes, COVID. No one saw it coming.
So there have been Chinese warning. What do you think about that in terms of your business?
Well, I think as long as Australia still can keep it be friendly, opening way, I think students still will come.
And the aspiration of the Chinese to have their children educated in Australia is more powerful.
I think so, but still, we wish both of the government to be friendly again.
Australia and China should and can still have a special relationship, and it's grounded in a few things, I think. One is obviously geography and proximity. Like we're close geographically and in time zones such that you can fly between Australia and China and not have to deal with jet lag. It doesn't knock off a week, from your life. So it's in terms of commuting distance, it's manageable.
So we've gone through this great journey to turn the tyranny of distance into the power of proximity, if you like, with Asia. But we now have this issue with China. Mark van Dyck has his eyes on a very big prize: to solve the Chinese puzzle for Australian businesses looking to capitalise in a post-COVID world. Chair of the Asia Task Force for the Business Council of Australia, he also manages Asia for Compass Group, the world's largest contract food service company. And what he says about Australia's track record in China is certainly food for thought. Do you think this was avoidable? Because, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, this wasn't the case. And all this talk about, well, we'll just diversify to India or Indonesia, it's not really realistic, is it?
Look, I'm not a great fan of the argument that goes, let's just reduce trade to China. I mean, China is critically important for us. It's about 30% of our trade, it's 40% of resources. But beyond that, China is also single largest number of tourists. It's a large provider of students. It's a very big provider of foreign investment. So China's an important part of our trade base. Let's put it in perspective as well, though, which is that, we've traded with China for 100 years, and we've kind of gone through these bumps before and found a way around. And yes, COVID has been an exceptional set of circumstances, and I really feel, for those that have been trying to face into China on policy, because it's been a very difficult environment. But right now, I think we have an opportunity to reset. I think in one of the things for us to think very hard about is, as soon as we can travel, is getting people back into China, getting business back into China. Something we sometimes forget is trade and business can build really strong interdependency and effectively can be another channel for how you build a relationship with China.
Our economies are just so complementary. China has so much of what we need: a massive consumer market, deep pools of capital, deep investment in science and research, and a real hunger for what we have to offer: natural resources, brilliant education system, natural environment, clean and green produce. So our economies are almost uniquely complementary.
But I cannot stress enough the need for us to recognize that now is the window. And let me give you an example as a sort of proxy for how well we're doing, in my view, of some of those new sectors. If you take food, which is something obviously dear to my heart, and the China imported food market is unbelievably dynamic. It's a large market. The largest exporter to China of food is New Zealand. The fastest growing exporter of food to China is now Chile. Australia is in either of those positions. We actually have about 8% share of that market. And yet, we have unbelievable agricultural capability. The last time we assessed it, I think we have the potential to feed a population of 140 million. It needs to be value added, but we could be the delicatessen to Asia. And that's a massive opportunity. But right now, we're not really fully stepping up to that. And the question is why?
Australian beef still very much loved. Research has shown Chinese consumers love Aussie beef. Very premium. They love the texture and the taste, but they do say it's replaceable. There are substitutes unless we get our act together. Dairy, again, it's something that has a great reputation. Got to think beyond the big cities in China. It's not just Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, but you think about all the hundreds of cities with over 1 million people in the second tier, the third tier, the fourth tier, the fifth tier sort of cities in regional China. Those consumers are what the Chinese government really want to lift up, because if you increase the spending power of those consumers, that's what's really going to drive the domestic consumption that's going to take the place, rebalance the Chinese economy away from exports. Now I'm sounding like an economist.
Oh, you'll get over it, don't worry.
Yeah, don't actually know what I'm talking about. But they're the people who are going to buy Australian milk, liquid milk, infant formula, etc. So huge opportunity, I think, in fresh, healthy, natural, safe food. We don't have to be unnecessarily provocative of China. Gareth Evans has a nice phrase for it. We can dial down our rhetorical stridency. We don't have to provoke China in ways that are not necessarily in our interest. And I think it's important for us to recognise we're not the United States. We're not a superpower with a razor-sharp view to our own national interests and what's good for Australia.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, people who feel good about using strong rhetoric at a press conference don't think about the economic consequences of the 10,000 Australian small businesses that have business interests in China, let alone the living standards of the average Australian?
Our trade with China is about 8.5% of our GDP. 1 in 13 Australian jobs has something to do with our trade with China. So this is the real economy, and it's not something to flippantly say, let's just decouple from China or trash our relationship. That is a very serious thing to propose, and I personally don't think it's in our national interest. And it's our job to stand up for that in our interests, but not in the interests of any other country.
The politics is inescapable, yet good ideas have a power to transcend politicians. Good ideas will win. And on this, it is worth listening to Dick Hewitt, whose company is bringing hearing to thousands in both Australia and China. When thinking about, the time after the pandemic and a lot of the headlines about political tensions with China, do you think ultimately, though, that China's going to be very important for Australia's prosperity post-COVID?
Well, it is now. You look at our trading relationship with China and it's very, very significant. And hopefully that will continue. It's in the economic interest of both countries to have a strong trading relationship. Clearly, things are more challenging now. But certainly what we're seeing on the ground in China is our people continue to get implants. Parents want their children to be able to hear. Business is going well. And we're there for the long run.
So much so that diggers dug the first sod for a state-of-the-art manufacturing facility in Chengdu, which will spearhead the company's Chinese expansion for the next 3 decades. That's the level of their commitment to China. Now, you picked Chengdu, one of my favourite places in Sichuan province. Why did you pick Chengdu to base your factory?
So one is Chengdu, as you know, is a very big city. Large numbers of good employees there, so several universities, very, very good medical hospital. And it's also part of what the Chinese government is trying to do is to move the development from the coastal China to Western China. And it's also an area that's underserved in terms of cochlear implants.
And of course, the Great Mall of China, the big shopping centre in Chengdu, is designed by Australian architects. So it's got a good Australian presence, hasn't it?
It does have a good Australian presence. I've been to that shopping centre. It is huge. It's unbelievable.
And it's got its own ice skating rink, so
yes.
It's quite something. Cochlear has the hunger to grow. That drive, that commitment, that passion is a prerequisite for business success in China. Without it, don't even try.
People are just hungry. And so in that sort of a hyper-competitive environment, as an Aussie business going into China, that's what you're up against. And so you have to have a certain mindset and tick certain boxes in order to be successful in China.
What would be your sort of 3 key tips that every Australian business should apply to their Asia strategy?
Sure, great question. Look, I'm a great believer in having feet on the ground. You've got to have feet on the ground. And to give you an example of that, when China recovered from COVID, we were remobilising sites, having people coming back to work literally within days. And I could do that because I have 4,000 people on the ground. So I think that's a really critical kind of phase of development. I'm a great believer in local leaders. All of my MDs are locals. In fact, in a leadership team of 17, I have 9 different nationalities. So I think that's critical because you end up with leaders and leadership teams that really understand the country and are able to adapt to the nuances and really take your value proposition and develop in that context. So I think that builds stronger, more viable business in Asia. And also it means that you can build the sort of relationships that are critical in building an Asia business. And then very lastly, I think it's important to get Asia expertise on your board and at senior leadership's level. I mean, Asia can be frightening for some businesses, but one of the ways that it becomes less frightening is you actually have people who really understand it and know what they're doing in the region.
As Charles Dickens wrote, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And so it has been with COVID. It's been challenging, yet it's also created innovative new ways of thinking and doing business. If there's been one common theme from the many people I've spoken to in this series, it is that armed with those lessons, life after the pandemic holds possibility and hope. but there's some hard work required.
China is a reality, right? It's not some mirage like some other markets that are being often touted in Australia. China is a reality. It is adding more new purchasing power than any other economy in the world. Chinese consumers love Australian goods and services, so you've got that complementarity there as well. So there's all these fundamental reasons to be optimistic. The politics is the challenge, Tim.
If you ran your own business and you had one customer account for 38% of your business, you'd think they were pretty important. And the prospect of losing that customer or losing the faith of that customer could be devastating to your business. That is China to Australia.
We need an activist, forward-looking diplomatic agenda that's quite clear. It should be premised on engagement with China. It should be quite clear that our interests are not identical to the United States.
You know, you can't win every argument, full stop, and you certainly can't win every argument with a megaphone.
I think the fundamental issue right now is really this lack of trust between the countries and also lack of goodwill. So if there's goodwill and trust between the two countries, even a small amount of it, I think both sides would be willing to, you know, just to put aside some of the differences and to prioritize.
I just think cross-cultural communication is so important and just respecting each other's cultures. And I just want to be a part of the conversation and be someone that is encouraging people to learn more about other cultures.
It's easy to bring conflict. It's a lot harder to bring consensus. And if you're serious about your country, if you're serious about your industry, if you're serious about your business, then consensus has to play a huge role in it.